what is the future of the art world? Where do we want it to go? And is this the right direction of the travel? These questions are really at the core of András Szántós' new book, The Future of the Art World, for which he interviewed 38 luminaries from across our industry to really ponder this question. But this question, in a way, have also inspired the rest of our program today. So welcome, everybody. My name is Colleen Milliard. I'm the executive editor here at Art Basel, and today we'll think about the way artists think about history, whether it's addressing erasures of the past or writing now the history of the future with artists Hank Willis Thomas and Anne Hemschein from the Archive of American Art. We'll also look at the way Black patrons and collectors are redrawing the contours of philanthropy in the US and beyond. But we're starting the day with the OG, with András himself, who selected and invited interviewees from the book, starting at the far end with Larissa Buchholz from Northwestern, a sociologist who's accepted to join us. We're absolutely thrilled. Pablo León de la Barra from the Guggenheim, and Mia Locks from the museum moving forward. On that note, I will invite you to all enjoy the conversation and also invite you to something else, something very special, as after this panel, András and his guests will be signing the book at the shop, which is downstairs in the West Lobby. So make sure to come to that and grab your copy. And now, over to András. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you so much. Now we know who the really serious art aficionados are, who are able to come at the beginning of a busy day at Art Basel to the show. Hi. A lot of friends in the audience. You know, last night there was the Art Basel Award, and one of the categories, which I thought was very beautiful category, was called Allies. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Allies for making this happen, starting with Colleen and Simon and this team. Noah Horowitz wanted to come by, but he had a long night. There was actually 2 Art Basel directors in the book. Previous director Mark Spiegler also in the book. But there's really an important group of people behind all this. Within Art Basel, I also want to thank the Art Basel shop team. There is a shop at Art Basel. It's on the Botanic Garden side, so we will actually go over there immediately after this. And there are books, so bring your wallet. Think about all the Christmas shopping you need to do. But going on, I mean, there's so many people to thank. First of all, 38 contributors to this latest volume, which comes after 21 contributors to the previous one and 28 to the one before that. And then the amazing team, 2 of them are here today, Laura Noguera and Guadalupe Lobeto. And, you know, Emily Market was indefatigable editor, Miles McDonald, indefatigable copy editor, Hachi Khan's DAP. I mean, it really takes a lot of people to make this happen. And above all, my very patient and busy interlocutors, more about whom in a minute. So we're going to talk about the future of the art world. As I wrote in my introduction, when you write a book called The Future of the Art World, every conversation starts with, is there even a future of the art world? I mean, it's a funny thing, but the answer is yes. The question is what it is. For me, it's not working. So now I have to do both? Okay, that's a lot. Is it better? Was it already good? It's better? Okay, all right. So the first book I did during the pandemic, it was a time when we were all wondering what comes next. I talked to 28 museum directors, and by the fall of 2020, The Future of the Museum came out. And in a way, I've started to think about that book as being about the museum software, because it revealed that the museum we see today is a very different beast than what I, for example, grew up with. Next came a book about the hardware, the architecture of the museum. If there's going to be a new kind of museum, it has to have new architecture, infrastructure around it. So I talked to 21 architects about that. Turns out museum architecture is moving in new directions. And then the logical, when you do 2 books, you have to do 3 books because everybody's like, what's the 3rd book? So the trilogy has now concluded with the next move, which is, if we have the software and the hardware, what's around that? What is the ecosystem around the museum? So I was motivated by the museum, but what this book forced me to do was to look at the whole art system. And for me, that was very exciting, because now I could talk to curators and sociologists and philosophers and art dealers and collectors and patrons and movers and shakers from all around the world, which is why we have so many in this book. You know, for me, it was a little bit of a homecoming, because I'd studied the art world through much of my life, but we'll get back to that as well. What I'm hoping we'll do is to not be too gloomy here. There are a lot of problems in this world, undeniably. There's a lot of systemic tensions. But hopefully our posture is, you know, how can we move forward? And to guide us, already introduced, we have an amazing curator from Latin America, although he's never really in any particular place at any one time, Pablo. We have an analyst of museums who is herself a distinguished curator, now leading an organization that studies the museum as an organization, as a workplace, Mia, from Los Angeles. And we have a de facto sociologist of art from Northwestern University. So first of all, please give them a quick clap so they can feel good about all this. Yeah. So before we go on, just a quick note about the future, a kind of a disclaimer, which is no one knows what the future looks like. And if you need any demonstration of that, just think of our last 5 years. We had a global pandemic. We've had the rise of, you know, polarized authoritarian politics. We've had, in case you haven't heard, an AI revolution. We've had venerable galleries going out of business, venerable museums facing severe pressures. We had a very quick but sharp explosion in digital art assets that came and went. Remember NFTs? We've had serious concerns just this summer about the art market crashing, and then all of a sudden we had a $230 million Klimt and a $50 million Kahlo and a $2 billion auction week. So none of this could have been predicted, and we're not necessarily here in the prediction business, but with, you know, many decades of accumulated study of the art world, hopefully we can make some educated guesses or give you some sort of searchlights about how we move forward. And what I'm going to do is pull in each of our speakers briefly to talk about certain aspects of this, and we have a couple of topics we've agreed to explore together in this sort of very constructive and hopeful way that I hope we'll be doing it. And we're going to start with Larissa. Fun fact, she and I graduated from the same department of sociology, although 20 years apart. I studied, my dissertation was about galleries and the art world of the 1980s, which is an epic boom time that many of you don't remember, but I think some of you do. And she studied the globalization of the art world, which resulted in really one of the most important new works in the sociology of art in recent years, called The Global Rules of Art. Hugely ambitious, hugely deeply researched book it is. So Larissa, how do you speculate about the future of the art world, and particularly the commercial side, galleries, since they surround us today?
Well, when I would like to talk about the future of the art world, I would like to talk about 3 topics in general that I can talk about. Is the future of smaller galleries. It's a huge problem. It's a huge structural change undergoing in the market. And maybe we can later address the question of deglobalization and the reproduction of collectors among new generations and what's happening there. But let me start to talk about small and mid-tier galleries, which is not necessarily, we don't need that slide yet, but anyway, which is not necessarily a very glamorous topic, but it's one of the biggest challenges shaping the future of the art world. Across markets from Mexico, Germany, China, the US, we see the same pattern, the hollowing out of the middle of the system. And this tendency is not anecdotal, it's structural. There are several structural changes happening and intensifying. Among them is that the economics for smaller galleries become really, really challenging. Art fair prices are really high, and small galleries cannot necessarily absorb that year after year, especially when the market is feeble. Secondly, the large mega galleries create a very oligopolistic market system, which makes it harder and harder for them to compete and to retain their artists and see returns on their investment. And last but not least, galleries are increasingly bypassed by alternative circuits. And these are not just studio sales, these are the new artist social media platforms, these are collector-to-collector networks in emerging markets, these are auction-driven systems like in China, which are very auction-centric. And then we also see the rise of new agencies. And so small galleries don't necessarily see the return that they need to sustain themselves. So why does this all matter? Why do we need small and mid-tier galleries? Because the art world would look very different without them. First of all, when it comes to artistic careers, we will see without this kind of long-term slow development of artistic significance, which is also grounded in discursive and symbolic framing and creating these networks with mediators and so on, we see artistic moments, but we don't necessarily see careers with long-term significance. These small galleries really lay the groundwork, and everyone knows that, for these kind of slow building of careers. And while auction can create excitement, they don't necessarily create stability. So that's really important. Galleries are also these small galleries are kind of the R&D labs of the art world. This is where the most innovation occurs within the art market. And when these galleries contract, we also see a narrowing down in terms of what kind of innovation becomes possible and raises also to the top, to other tiers of the art market. And simply symbolic value erodes. It becomes more about visibility, celebrity. We see some of this already in the current market system, but when these galleries break down further and disappear, we see that becomes more of a dominant structural reality. So with all that being said, and I'm just scratching the surface here and giving our time constraints, with all that being said, so where's the hope? What can we do about it? Yeah, so we are here at an art fair, so it's good to talk about this here, because art fairs are shaping the gallery or ecosystem tremendously, and so they are also uniquely positioned to contribute to support those who are most under pressure. And one of the biggest aspects of it is, of course, financial structure. Currently, art fairs have differentiated booth fees, but these current fees don't necessarily reflect the reality of a 3-person gallery versus a multinational one. So there could be a more calibrated pricing system. There could be more help in terms of pooled shipping and transportation logistics. That's something that Carlos from Curator Gallery mentioned to me. And also there could be very deliberate, and that's already happening and that's already helping, deliberate attention to creating designed visibility for these smaller galleries. There's something that Peckwood Gallery mentioned to me, how important that is to make sure that these younger sections create the exposure that they need at these fairs. And last but not least, what's an underappreciated aspect is how do we design for more peer-to-peer mentorship, collaboration among galleries themselves at the art fairs. In previous iterations, so in smaller art fairs in the past, this happened more organically, but now we have these big fairs, and there could be more fostering of collaboration and mentorship among galleries and also between the bigger and smaller ones. That's a very crucial aspect that could be fostered.
Maybe we can get Noah in here to rebut your...
What?
Actually, there's several people in the art fair circuit in the book, including some folks who are really innovating the art fair model, both here at Art Basel, but also in places like Nigeria. So, the art fair itself is not static, and a lot of us forget that this whole gestalt of the art fair that we are experiencing today is a very new invention. I mean, these things happened in some of our lifetimes, this whole setup with the tiered systems and the VIP red carpet situation. Quick 2 questions and then we'll move on. One, is this borne out in the data that small and mid-tier galleries are, as you said, hollowing out? Or is it, to some extent, a misperception? Because, I mean, every time a big gallery or a beloved mid-tier gallery closes, we have a huge article in the newspaper. But when 10 small galleries open in Bogota or Rio, there isn't an article in the newspaper. So in terms of numbers, does the data show that the overall ecosystem now has fewer galleries, or is the number of galleries still growing?
I think what the question is really important because, first of all, I do research on emerging markets, or no longer so emerging. I mean, I work on China and I work on Mexico. I'm immersed in the German and in the US context, in the ecologies. And what we see is really that these structural changes that are really underway really make it harder for galleries to grow. So we see new foundations, but they don't last necessarily long. A lot of these small galleries come from artist collectives or project spaces that move to the next. So there's a lot of dynamics on the very ground, but they can't necessarily sustain themselves given these structural changes. And so what I think what the data show us, the available data I have, is that this old narrative that a small gallery can become a mid-tier gallery, can become a major gallery, is no longer the structural reality we operate
like
in.
there was 10 galleries were able to do that, but now everybody's trapped underneath.
So this kind of story, there is a fiction of growth. George Sanguino called it a fiction of growth. And that is no longer happening. It's a deeply oligopolistic market, and that's for sure.
All right, big word, everyone, headline. We're going to go on to Pablo, who you guys have a connection because of Mexico City, which is where Pablo is from, although he's mainly based in Rio. And anybody who's ever had any dealings with Latin American art has come across Pablo León de la Barra because he is sort of everywhere. He has met, I think, every artist. He has studied every artist initiative. In this book, you particularly talk a lot about the other side of this equation, which is artist-led initiatives. You know, it's one of the interesting features of the art world is where there's a gap or a dysfunction, you know, we invent sort of workarounds like artist-led initiatives. But Pablo, I mean, you've seen it all. Of course, your best-known role is as the Guggenheim's Latin America curator. But tell us a little bit about your sense of how you see the art world from where you sit and in the circles you move in. What sort of keeps you up at night and what gives you hope?
Okay, so first of all, you hear me?
Do you hear him?
Yeah. First of all, happy to be here, András. András and I come a long way. We met through our dear friend Albertine Kopp and the Caribbean Art Initiative, which was an initiative aimed to supporting and giving visibility to Caribbean artists 10 years ago when nobody was noticing. And since then, András and I have continued collaborating in different prizes, initiatives, juries, so I'm always happy. When András calls you, you're always there, no? András is our boss. The real boss. I live in a, let's say, interesting situation in which, on one hand, I work for an institution in New York, but I work from Rio de Janeiro, and I'm in charge of Latin America for the Guggenheim. So this basically means one, collection building, exhibitions, and patrons. So how to bring art from Latin America into the Guggenheim's collection and make it visible there, no? How to change the structure and the DNA of a museum, which for many years ignored the presence of its southern neighbors, and how to make space for this to happen, and how bringing art and exhibitions there could change this DNA of the museum. But also realistically thinking about how the whole population in the States is changing, no? And how the Latin population in the States is the biggest growing group in the States, no? So I think all these things have to do with each other. But then my other foot is based in Rio, and from there I travel a lot doing research on Latin America for the Guggenheim, but also research on the whole scene. And for me, where my heart really is, and this is what András was talking about, has to do with artist initiatives, no? How artists are the ones that keep the scene going, no? Are the ones that each one either through what the attention and the money that they pay through the market, but they find ways of giving back to their own context, no? how to support, and this has to do a little bit with what you were talking now, how to create new opportunities and new structures for the next generations. No, so for me, if you think about the future, I think there's a future, and this future has to do a lot with building communities, and these communities come a lot from artists, and these artists are building infrastructures where other who are supposed to build the structures are failing. No, in many of the contexts in Latin America, the structures are very fragile. No, governments change, economies collapse,
Yes.
Museums have no structures, and it's really the artists that keep the scene going. No, and I talk about it a lot in the chapter in the book. No, that if you go through the whole continent, and I could again do the list if we wanted, you see all these different initiatives, maybe many that been existing for 10, 15, 20 years, and which find ways of continuing existing, of artists creating art schools, artists creating not only art spaces, but also publications or publishing houses, and others working with communities that have nothing to do with art and bringing art to the communities or working with the communities. So really, I mean, if you go from Mexico, where there's Soma, which is an art school set by artists, or Alias Editorial done by Damian Ortega. If you go down to Guatemala, you have Numu, the new museum done by Jessica Caire and Stefan Bencham. In Costa Rica, you have Despacio, done by artist Federico Herrero. If you go to Colombia, there was Jose Roca and Flora. There's in Barranquilla, Marisabel Rueda, who has an art space and residency. In Brazil, you have Capacete in Rio de Janeiro, Pivot in Salvador, and in Sao Paulo. You have in Argentina, incredible Fernanda Laguna, who is an artist that I adore and that everyone should learn about her, who continuously is creating new spaces and reinventing spaces, but has a long-term project called Belleza y Felicidad Fiorito, where she works with cardboard pickers in the outskirts of Buenos Aires. It takes like an hour and a half to get there. You have to take 2 buses, and she engaged continuously with this community to work through art with them. So if you continue going through the whole region, there's all these initiatives happening there. No? So when people ask me, what can we do? I mean, I say, yeah, it's great that we support the Guggenheim and that we bring art and that you give us money, but also let's look back to the places where you come from and how can you support these artist initiatives there? You know?
Wow. I think we have a strong Latin fan base here. One of the dynamics in this book, which comes over and over again, is that what the last few decades have brought us, and we'll talk about globalization some more, is that different parts of the world which tended to copy global north models going forward are beginning to do different versions of the system, that there's opportunities to iterate. And in fact, in the introduction, I have various sort of scenarios for the future. One of them is called global pastiche, meaning a Middle East art world doesn't have to mirror a European-style art world.
No, that's the case.
What other than artist initiatives, like if you had to put it in one word, what would make the Latin American situation have a contrast with the sort of global north idea of what an art world is?
No, I guess it goes through what I was saying, no?
Yeah, this sort of artist thing.
How these different communities kind of engage with their own context. So I think that's a very particular element, and that's something that others outside could learn. No? I mean, yesterday at the awards, at the Art Basel Awards, there was this category that you said called Allies, and the other one, I don't know if it was called Spaces or something, but 2 of the winners were, Gasworks, which is an incredible initiative in London that functions a little bit the same way. So it's artist studios and bringing artists from the global south, giving them a space to create. So this is a structure that's there in the global north. And then Raw Material was also given an award, no? Which also operates similar to these other initiatives, no? A space created by Koyo.
Yeah, I think what we are seeing is a lot of things that Western institutions have sort of discovered are already very much in the DNA of and the same is true. I was just in India. The whole community-based aspect of arts organizations is much more baked into the standard operating ways of organizations in many places in the global south. We're going to move on to Mia, who had a very distinguished career, Whitney Biennial, MoCA LA, very happily putting together exhibitions and operating sort of in the higher echelons of the museum world. And I'm so glad you're in the book because, of course, when we think about the future, we're also thinking about the future of these very beloved, important, and yet imperfect institutions called museums. And you had your own sort of pandemic pivot, which is that you put together Museums Working Together, which is an organization that collects data from museums on many areas, but really also about workplaces. And it was a little bit of a shock when you first published your report, the first one, which was 2023, which had sort of a lot of pretty sobering news. People burnt out, a lot of people leaving the field. It was not a pretty picture. But anyway, tell us right now, as we sit here in 2025, how you see the health of these organizations, particularly museums.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us. Yeah, so the health of art museums is that's what I've been asked to talk about, is what I've been thinking a lot about after working in art museums for a long time. And I've been thinking a little bit about just even like how we assess health, because of course institutions do lots of things, and rather than focusing just on external outputs like exhibitions and even collections to some extent and programs, and I think this comes up in the first sort of book in the series, talking to museum directors during COVID. There's this shift, toward more internal systems and thinking about this kind of more people-oriented, I think you called it, museology, which is great. As people working in institutions, I have to say, still, that conversation involves a lot of people-like audiences who are extremely important. But to date, there had not been anybody talking about or studying or looking at the people working in these institutions, right? There's hundreds of thousands of workers in art museums, and our emphasis is on United States, so I'm going to talk about the United States, but of course this extends to some degree across the world. But the reason museums moving forward really emerged as an organization, and we're a limited life organization that was founded by curators mostly and other people working in the field, was really to address this kind of gap, right? That there just had been no information about museums, workforce or workplaces. And so we designed a biannual study that's called the first one came out in 2023. The last one actually just came out in October, and these are free. They're available online. You can look them up. But they're really about workplace equity and organizational culture in U.S. art museums. And so we now have numbers. It's a quantitative study. We partner with lots of data scientists, and there's lots of visualizations. I know we're a very visual field, so it's not like spreadsheets. There's a lot of colors and images. Because I didn't study data science, it's important that we look at data in a way that's useful and helpful and easy to understand. But we designed the study, and we work in partnership with now 91 museums across the country, 31 states, I think, and Puerto Rico, and so we've expanded a lot. But really the point was to sort of address this kind of missing data set around the workplace and around workers. And so when I was asked to sort of think about the health of institutions, I just sort of thought of like what that would sort of look like and what that really means. And so there's a couple like causes for concern that, yes, the first study did have some sobering data, but it's important to remember that context. That was also on the heels of the most acute part of the COVID pandemic. A lot of people had died, a lot of people had been laid off. I mean, the institutions were struggling just like the rest of the world, right? And now we're in a different sort of moment, but there is still cause for concern. And I think, we'll talk about the sort of related forces that I think my colleagues have already mentioned. But one of the causes for concern that I think hasn't been addressed is really this question about these intergenerational workplaces, which is not exclusive to art museums, but that there's real serious, generational shift happening in our field. This is true of other sectors, but in the art museum sector, we now have the majority of our workforce, 63% of the workforce is now millennials and Gen Z. We're seeing a decrease, of course, in baby boomers and Gen X. And with that, we're seeing a lot of shifts in, the culture inside these places. We're seeing a huge unionization movement. In the last 10 years, there's been a massive rise in art museum unions. And just like across the country, that is primarily, the art museum union members are primarily, millennials and Gen Z. I think it's 71% of the art museum unions are these kind of younger generation. And this is also affecting, of course, the other demographics of the workforce. So now we see, for instance, even in the last 2 years, a 5% increase in workers who identify as non-binary or other gender. So we're seeing, more gender diversity in the workplace, primarily concentrated in that Gen Z cohort. And then we're also seeing, even with disability, we now have a quarter of art museum workers that identify as having a disability, many of them a mental health disability. And again, this is concentrated in the Gen Z cohort. So in this kind of mix of all the kinds of diversity, I should say, the racial and ethnic diversity in art museums is also something that we study. And while there's actually been a decrease in racial and ethnic diversity in art museums in the last 2 years, a 3% decrease, which is significant, but not, it's, statistically significant. In that entry-level cohort, that's where all the diversity is. So there's this really fascinating phenomenon where I was told my entire career that the art museum sector had this kind of pipeline problem, that we needed to sort of diversify these, early career, but that's actually not the case. And I think it's a similar phenomenon to what you're saying, which is that something happens in the middle. We have all this diversity in the entry level, and people can't afford to stay. So the other thing that I think is a cause for concern, which is maybe very obvious but worth stating, is the financial stability of these institutions, right? We could say a lot about it kind of there's many other forces at play, but I guess specifically around the workforce, we survey directors, we also survey workers across departments, and directors are telling us, on average, they're already spending 56% of their operating budgets on staff compensation and benefits. That's a lot of
And
your
often
budget.
more.
Sometimes a lot more, but sometimes, but that's a lot of your budget, right? And we also ask workers, how much they're making, which of course is the section everybody skips to because they like to talk about salary, which is totally important. But we don't just ask about how much money people are making. We also do an analysis of the living wage because we see, this is based on cost of living in these different areas. This is based on, your own individual income. And we do a very conservative analysis because the living wage, just to be clear, is not a thriving wage. This isn't about paying off debt, caregiving responsibilities. This is just your own, rent and your own food. And over a quarter of art museum workers are not making a living wage for their region. 28% of full-time workers. Let's just put part-time aside for the moment, but full-time workers. And when you look at the entry level, it's 69% of full-time entry-level workers. Again, that's where all this diversity is, right? Across every metric. And they can't afford to stay in the field long enough to make a living wage. So that's a concern I have. Which we can talk about. And then, but I will say there is cause for hope in the data this year.
I was waiting for the hopeful part.
Sorry, but this is the truth. I want to be honest with you guys.
Depressed here.
But there is some cause for hope. This year's report, again, we did a study in 2023. So even in the last 2 years, satisfaction is up, like on every metric for art museum workers. They are more satisfied, except for opportunities for promotion, which we can talk about. But across the other metrics, people are happier. And it's interesting because the last study, one of the big kind of data points that was cited a lot was that, art museum workers were far less satisfied than the US workforce overall, which was true then. It's not true anymore. Actually, art museum workers now are actually more satisfied than the US workforce, except for promotion, which again, there's a reason for that. Very few of them are getting promotions. But the other cause for hope, I would say, is some interesting things we're seeing in the smallest museums. They actually have the healthiest cultures and the highest satisfaction of their staffs on average, even though they tend to pay the lowest salaries. And so I think there's something interesting. I mean, small galleries maybe are R&D, but I think small museums are also a kind of R&D, which is to say, like, something good is happening there, and even though we have to pay living wages, because it is the #1 threat to diversity in the field, we also know that pay isn't the only factor. It's not the only thing that matters. Nobody comes into the museum field because they're trying to make a lot of money. Literally nobody. But if once they're making a living wage, once they can sort of afford their lives, they're looking for something which, and this is what also gives me hope, is that there's so many incredible people. I don't know if anyone here has worked in a museum or is working in a museum.
Who has worked in a museum?
Has anybody worked in a museum? Okay, a lot of you. Okay, 93% of art museum workers are like, I have these great relationships with my colleagues. My dearest friends still are people that I met in different departments across different institutions, like really wonderful, brilliant, devoted people who, again, 84% of them, or I think it's 87%, say the work they're doing is meaningful. It's like 3/4 are like, this is so much purpose and dignity. So I guess the hopeful bit for me is that museums moving forward is just one example, but I do believe all of these very brilliant, very dedicated people will continue to work together and will continue to, kind of design together some solutions that are going to focus on, the kind of health of our institutions, not just for ourselves, but for future generations too.
And I think this is all part of a big pivot in museums to rethink what their workforce is even about. I mean, it used to be that you took the bad salary, partly because you were coming from a background, perhaps, that you got some support from home, but you were sort of supposed to struggle. And if any of you have seen the office spaces of many museums, it's pretty bleak. I mean, office workers in museums often in the basement. Like no self-respecting large company would put their workers in those situations. But even that is changing. So there's a lot of rethink. And the museum, I always say, is a kind of petri dish of society at large. But moving on, because we have limited time, 4 quick questions. We have a little more than that, but not much more. 4 quick questions. One is about globalization. I mean, the defining transformative fact of our lifetimes in the art world has been its globalization. That is the most transformative force. You wrote a book about it. You lived it. You also lived it. We all lived it. Now the winds of deglobalization are blowing. Are we concerned about that? Or is this just a blip in a larger trajectory?
András, I would even question the very hypothesis that we are undergoing deglobalization in the art world. It's very obvious that we have deglobalization tendencies in the larger economic spectrum, slowing global trade, disruption of supply chains, new tariffs, but they don't necessarily affect one-to-one the art world and the art market. Contemporary art is a high-value, low-volume good. The tariffs that are imposed on other industries didn't hit the contemporary art market. We don't have major supply chains to disrupt, and we are not a strategic industrial sector. So many of these geopolitical changes don't directly affect the contemporary art world.
Okay, that's
so
good news.
I don't see systemic deglobalization, and I can explain why. But that's a particular way of thinking about globalization in the arts in the first place. But maybe first the others.
You had the little diagram.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you show it? I was curious about.
So the question is, what does globalization actually mean in the art world? And then we can more meaningfully ask, what does deglobalization mean, and is it actually happening? And I, in my book, developed this kind of threefold scheme of globalization in the last 4 decades, happening through 3 vertical transformations, 3 main transformations. The creation of global infrastructures for art exhibitions and trade, and Art Basel was, of course, very, very key player in that for the art fairs. The rise and transformation of field-specific global discourses to the extent that the very notion of a global art market or global art world became normalized. And third, the creation of global institutions for consecration and evaluation, global art prizes, global rankings even, and global online platforms that review...
Global Art Awards?
Global Art Awards, exactly. I mean, this is like the very most recent one yesterday. And when we look at these kind of threefold structure and go through each of them, then in terms of global infrastructure, we see remarkable continuity. Art Basel, for example, it's just one example, is expanding, it's not contracting. Yeah. What we might see within this is that we have regionalization tendencies, but these regionalization tendencies or regional hubs, for example, with Art Basel, you could say global regional hubs like Hong Kong, upcoming Doha, they feed into an overall global system that is still relatively stable as a framework. In terms of transformation of global discourses, it's true that global talk has receded in the art world. This very deglobalization talk is a symptom of that. Or that global discourses have transformed into different types of global discourses around the global south, decoloniality, etc.
It's just been normalized.
Yeah.
Like it's just become
in some
a
ways,
fact
it
of
has
life.
been normalized. Yeah.
Okay.
And let me just add the last point. The next slide. So
next slide.
So overall, I would say, yep. Next. No, it's okay. So, but what we do see is when we have this as a more, when we look at the global as one layer within a multi-scalar structure, What we do see is that single states are deglobalizing from this global level, like China, renationalization of cultural policy. Obviously, UK, London, Brexit has led to certain deglobalization tendencies, or Russia's isolation. But these single withdrawals don't necessarily destabilize the overall global framework that I just very quickly and very sketchily outlined.
Phenomenal.
That's
okay,
my...
I'm going to ask the next one, just in the interest of time. Here's 3 other things that we're hearing a lot of anxiety about. Collectors are going to tire of collecting. Walls are full, and this sort of massive expansion of collecting will abate. Second, that the new generation of people with wealth are not going to be good donors to museums. And third, that the markets, 3-4 decades of expansion will break and something fundamental will change. I'm curious if any of you have reflections in any of these areas. Which of these things do you worry the most about?
Well, of course, I worry about the generation of philanthropists, but I don't know that that's true, actually. I mean, people say, there's this global transfer of wealth that's happening generationally, and people have a lot of concern that younger generations aren't going to support museums. They are. They're just going to support them in a different way. Like all generations, change.
What will they want?
Well, they want to be more aligned with the mission and the vision and the values of these institutions. They want these institutions to have unique missions. I mean, it's the same way that this generation has showed us that they're willing to, pay more to buy a product from a company that, has good labor practices or, whatever, uses organic cotton. It's like that people do want to pay a premium to feel an alignment. And I think that's true of our cultural institutions as well. And I think this generation of philanthropists has at least shown us so far to date that they're absolutely willing to support, but they want to see some creativity. They want to see some, impact beyond just the assumption that I'm going to just, do this because of, because my parents or my grandparents did it. And I think that's hopeful. That actually is a zeitgeist that I'm excited about.
You're on board. Pablo, what's your perception?
I see a new generation of collectors or philanthropists, let's say, that are choosing to act in a different way. And I find that interesting, that they're not interested in the big ego showing my collection in a big space. But really, what I see, and it connects to what I was talking before, is they're like, oh, how can I support structures that already exist? Or if I create a structure, how does this structure fills in something that's missing? No? So smaller scale, I think in the book I call them slow and more intimate. I don't remember the word I used, but really a kind of change in that it's not only about the ego, it's not only about the accumulation of wealth, it's not about selling your stuff in auction when you die, but kind of really rethinking what it means to be a collector. And that's my hope, that people can get this message, and that maybe that we can help that message enlighten these new generations.
Is this here in the U.S. we have this vast intergenerational wealth transfer happening. Could it be that we're actually about to enter a kind of hopeful time of major benefactions to museums? I mean, there's how many multiple $1 trillion of wealth that is going to be passed on from one generation to the next. I don't know if it's the same in Latin America, but certainly here it's happening. Do you have any sense of whether the art world can sort of capture this as a philanthropy going forward? Is this something you look at sociologically?
Well, from sociology, we know that wealth doesn't necessarily translate into cultural engagement and collecting. We know that inheritance of collections and growing up in a collecting context is a major factor to predict whether someone will become a collector. But in general, I would say that we need to rephrase the question, not whether it's happening, but how can we shape it, that it is happening. Mm-hmm. And we need to acknowledge that with the new generation, it's entering this whole field under very different conditions: digital culture, fragmented attention spans, a very accelerated speed of overall living conditions. And we need to think about, first of all, how can we improve the entry points for these people to enter the art world even before galleries, to create like art associations? And how can we create the conditions for them to become educated and engaged and committed? And one of the findings in my research on collectors in Mexico, China, and the Middle East is that in order to create serious collectors, most of them had really close relationships, one or two very formative relationships with mentors, friends, artist friends, gallerists. And the question is, in this current really high-speed environment and digitalized environment, how can we create the conditions for such close relationships to emerge? Very last point, I just want to highlight one last point. And another element that we could really improve on a systemic level is to increase more of symbolic recognition for model collectors. We reward artists, but we don't reward collectors enough, which carries so much of the ecosystem. Yesterday we saw the Patron Award, which was great. Yeah, we need more of that. We need more.
Well, Joel definitely deserved that. But I'm so glad you mentioned technology and this digital disruption, because everybody in the book, there were many different conversations, but one question that all three of you were asked, because everybody was asked, is whether there's going to be a kind of paradigmatic realignment of the art world. You know, if you look at other industries, you know, the taxi you used to get here, the newspaper you were reading this morning is delivered to you in a fundamentally different way than when you went to high school. So, and to my surprise, nobody actually said that something fundamentally disruptive is coming. I mean, the art world runs by more or less the same structural rules as it has since the 1870s. Galleries, museums, auction houses, collectors, critics, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that in our lifetimes some sort of fundamental restructuring might happen in some parts of the art world, like a digital platform sort of really taking over the way they have? I mean, just this morning, Netflix announced it's buying a huge movie studio. Do you see that coming, or are we sort of able to iterate our existing structures to meet the needs of the future?
Somebody want to answer that?
These are the questions they had to answer in the book, by the way.
I don't think it's going to be that abrupt. I mean, you just pointed to it. I mean, the systems are pretty solid. It's more, so at like a macro level, I don't think it's like tomorrow we're going to wake up and the robots will have taken over and we're not going to do art fairs anymore and everyone's going to be online. Like, I just don't believe that. I know there's a lot of anxiety about AI and about the future of technology, but I just think it's going to be more incremental. And I think, like we've seen historically in the field, like there's just going to be a shift in the locus of power among stakeholders. You know, there were times where the critic reigned supreme. There were times when and there will be moments now. I mean, you see artists that have access to capital being tremendously wealthy and building models to give back to their own communities. I mean, so it just is a matter of, power and influence, some of which is about capital, but I just feel like it's going to shift and evolve, and we'll see a new version, but I don't feel like it's going to be like...
So Mia says no.
I don't think so.
Larissa?
It's my prediction.
I think we can think about this in two main ways. The first one is at the very elite level, digital infrastructures have become more complementary, and there was a huge push with the pandemic, but they cannot substitute at the elite level for the experience of the artwork and for the experience of the relational aspect of this art world. And that's what makes the art world so unique comparison to the book market, for example. Artworks are singular goods, and the contemporary art world in particularly is also a place where elites mingle and they really enjoy the social aspect. Now, if we broaden the view, because we don't just have one art world, we have multiple art worlds. If we broaden the view, there is definitely a proliferation of alternative channels, alternative platforms, new AI tools, whatever. So what we see is an inner segmentation and further expansion of different types of art worlds that on the fringes might feed back into the elite level. I already mentioned the social media artist platforms, and now collectors are searching frantically globally, where's the next hot artist from Africa, and they're not using galleries, they're using social media and things like that. But I think there's this complementary aspect versus the inner expansion, but I don't think there is a major paradigm shift at this elite level.
Pablo, yes or no?
No, I think that because of the extreme presence of technology, of the media, of communication, there's also this extreme need for real connections, no? And that's a connection that still art gives us today. We need the object, be it digital, be it physical, be it, we need it, but we also need the connections amongst each other, no? And again, this is where art becomes important in terms of, okay, there's communities, there's a need of talking to each other, so yes, there's a digital aspect there, which will continue evolving, no? I mean, now we have this, but it will become something else, and the technology will continue evolving. But we will still need that need for real connections and to feel the real object in a place, no? Still, at least, I think, for the next generation.
Our life.
That's our great.
Maybe next ones it will be kind of a something that.
We're almost done. I should mention, apropos of technology, if you go on my website, which is my name, or my Instagram, you can find your way to the book page on my website, andrassanto.com, where you will find a dedicated AI feature for this book. This is a first art book in history that has its own AI, which is brought to us by a new art navigation app called Artless and their AI tool. So all of your dialogues have been fed into this AI, and it's only the dialogue. So it's not, stuff from the internet. So you can interact with the book using its own AI, which I think in the future every book will have its own AI. Okay, last question.
So much about
It would be like the index of the future. Just a quick hypothetical, and then we can all go to the book signing, those of you who would like to come. Imagine that you have been invited by the board of a museum, because in the end, we care about museums here a lot. And this board is meeting because they really want to have a super honest discussion about how they're going to stay relevant in the future. And so they brought you in as experts to really think out of the box about what types of initiatives or strategies will keep them relevant for their audiences for the decades to come. They've read this book, which is why they've invited you, because they realize you're among the smartest people in the art world. They've watched this panel. They already have heard these ideas, but they want some great ideas, and they will underwrite it. So what is one thing this museum, this hypothetical museum, needs to do to stay relevant? We're going to go Pablo, Larissa, and then Mia.
I mean, I would think that that what the museum would have to do to stay relevant, maybe it's not external but internal, no? And I think it has to do with things that you touch, no? And that could be equality of pay for everyone, including maybe directors, no? How would everyone receive salaries that make it livable to work within a museum, no? And I think that would be a big change, no?
So Pablo's endorsing Mia's movement. Okay, Larissa. They should study more sociological studies of.
I can give you two answers. Okay. The first one is pragmatic. Do a thorough audience analysis. Know your audience. Listen to your audience, and then you can react. But that's the boring answer. Mm-hmm. The real answer I want to give you, they should move the discourse forward. They should be risk-taking. They should be innovative. They should not buy into preemptive marketing and adapting to audience. They should lead the audience. Mm.
Mia, last word. What should they do?
I mean, I think they should, if they haven't already, but most of them haven't, develop a living wage strategy so that their workers are paid a living wage, because you can't have financial stability if you don't have a stable workforce.
Mm. Yeah. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. As I said, first of all, thank you so much to these wonderful people for sharing their thoughts. We can't do questions. We unfortunately were told
but
no,
we'll
answer
questions
today.
after
Informally. We are all heading over to the shop, so we can have a little chit chat. The shop is on the other side of the show. If you were heading to the Botanic Garden, there are copies of all the books for sale, and we will sign them, or I will sign them. You guys can sign them as well. So thank you again. Enjoy the show, and come back.
Thank you.